අලුතෙන් SLT Mobitel Home 4G LTE connection ගන්නාට වටිනා tab computers සහ data දීමනා. අලුතෙන් SLT Mobitel Home 4G LTE connection ගන්නාට වටිනා tab computers සහ data දීමනා.
නව Tomex පැල්ලම් සහ විස බීජ අවම කර දින 3ක් දක්වා ටොයිලට් එක ෆ්‍රෙෂ්ව තමයි. Tomex.
In your headlines tonight, crucial moment. Although all parties in parliament were urged to come forward to help resolve current economic crisis, no one came forward, says Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa in special statement. Lifeline, 375 to 400 million US dollars of $500 million Indian credit line already used as panic buying spikes fuel demand. Better days. Rainfalls over hydro-catchment areas gives hope of shortened scheduled power cuts. All this and much more coming up tonight on First at 9. This Monday, the 11th of April, 2022.
Fair and Lovely Men's will alut namadan glow and handsome.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
And a warm welcome, bringing you news from across Sri Lanka and around the world tonight. I'm Indivari Amuatha. In a special statement today, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa reassured that as the government in power, they will take all possible measures to overcome the crisis immediately. However, the Premier went on to say that even though a call was made to all parties represented in Parliament to come forward to help resolve the current economic crisis in the country, no one did so. He added that the protests carried out in the country will only continue to drag the country further into crisis, as he said that every second spent on protests make the country lose out on the ways of creating dollar inflows.
තෙල් පෝලිං වල දින ගණන් රස්තියාදු වුණු ජනතාවගේ වේස අපිට තේරෙනවා. ගෑස් ගන්න පෝලිං වල රස්තියාදු වුණු කාන්තාවගේ වේදනාව අපිට තේරුම් ගන්න පුළුවන්. පඩු මිල අහස උසට නැගලා තියෙන තත්ත්වය හමුවේ ජනතාව විඳින දුක් ගැට ගැන කාටවත් අවබෝධයක්. අපි පාර්ලිමේන්තුව නියෝජනය කරන හැම පක්ෂයකටම ආරාධනා කළා එකතු වෙලා රට ගොඩ ගමු කියලා. ඒත් ආවේ නැහැ. මේ වෙලාවේ පක්ෂ ගැන හිතනවට වඩා රටේ ආර්ථිකය ශක්තිමත් කර ගැනීමයි අප සියලු දෙනාගේම වගකීම වන්නේ. කවුරු වගකීම බාර නොගත්තත් බලයේ ඉන්න පක්ෂය හැටියට අපි ඒ වගකීම බාරගත්තා. අපි මේ ගැටලුවට විසඳුම් ලබා දෙනවා. අපි රටේ සෑම ප්‍රශ්නයකදීම ජනතාව රැකගන්න උපරිම කැපකිරීම කරපු ඉතිහාසයක් තමයි අපිට තියෙන්නේ. අපි මේ අර්බුදයෙන් ගොඩ එන්නත් සෑම උත්සාහයක්ම ගන්නවා. අද අපි මුහුණ දී තිබෙන අර්බුදේ ජය ගන්න අපි දැවැන්ත වැඩපිළිවෙලක යෙදිලා ඉන්නවා. ගෝවියට ඉතිහාසයේ වැඩිම සාහන දුන්නු අපිට දැන් ගෝවියා විරුද්ධයි. මොනතරම් රටට හොඳක් වුණත් කාබිනික පොහොර වැඩපිළිවෙල ගෙනියන්න මේක වෙලාව නොයි. ඒ නිසා අපි පොහොර සානාධාරය යලි ලබා දෙන්න තීන්දුව කරලා තියෙනවා. දවස් දෙකක තුනකින් බැරි වුණත් හැකි ඉක්මනින් මේ අර්බුදයට යන ගමන නවත්වන්න අපි කටයුතු කරනවා. ඔබ පාරේ විරෝධතා දක්වන සෑම තප්පරයකම අපේ රටට ඩොලර් ලැබෙන තියෙන අවස්ථාව අහිමි වෙනවා. මහා ප්‍රතිසංස්කරණ කරන්න කලින් ජාතියට අත්විය ඇති මේ විනාශය මේ රට බේරා ගැනීම අප කාගේත් වගකීමයි. ඒ සඳහා ශක්තිය තිබෙන, ධෛර්යය තිබෙන හැමෝටම අපි දැනටමත් ආරාධනා කරලා තියෙනවා.
Former Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe points out that Sri Lanka will be in a helpless state and in serious trouble when the Indian line of credit for fuel runs out by the second week of May at the latest. Speaking to an Indian news agency, the leader of the United National Party went on to say that those who ignored the country's economy for 2 years, leading to a dearth in foreign reserves, should be held responsible.
What is happening is a disaster to the country. For 2 years, the government ignored the economic issues. I remember when we left in 2019, there was a surplus on the primary budget and there was money to pay the debts. What happened is really the issue, and people have to be held responsible. We may run out of resources. I don't think the government has that much of resources left in the reserves, and now they are borrowing money from leading export companies to pay the bill. The Indian credit line for fuel will run out the latest by the second week of May, and then we are going to be in serious trouble again. There's no help in sight.
Meanwhile, Finance Minister Ali Sabri made a plea to Sri Lankan expatriates to remit their foreign earnings to the country through official channels in order to strengthen the forex coffers. Speaking to Reuters, Sabri said the priority now is to ensure that the country is safe, economy sustainable, supply chains, tourism and industries sustained as Sri Lanka's economy faces the most challenging time since independence.
We are also respectfully inviting all the Sri Lankan migrant workers all over the world, irrespective of political differences, political opinion, their right to protest and dissent, which we respect. This is about your country. Anyone to come and run this country need to be safe, and economy should be sustainable, and our supply chains and our industries and our tourism should be protected. Our institutions should be protected. So this is our need. Please send your money on the official channels so that you strengthen the coffers of the central bank. This is a very challenging time, in my opinion, the most challenging time as far as the economy is concerned since the independence. So that means there can be pressure on the supply chains. If the pressure on the supply chains, naturally the public agitation should be there. So that we need to talk to them, we need to explain to them. At least we must ask them, yes, we respect your right to protest, but no violence, because it is counterproductive.
Now, for a third consecutive day, determined protesters continue to descend in front of the Presidential Secretariat and the Goldface Green in Colombo today, with many more setting up camp at the agitation site from Sunday night. Meanwhile, similar to the anti-government protests carried out across the country, protests in support of government were also seen. Instances where clashes between the two factions were even reported.
Seeing no forthcoming solutions to the frustrations of the people in light of Sri Lanka's economic crisis is well demonstrated across the country as people continue to take to the streets. The mass protest seen at the Goldface Green on Saturday continued in front of the Presidential Secretariat on Sunday, and the protesters relentlessly stayed true to their cause despite heavy rains. On Sunday, the protest started off with low numbers, but many were seen joining the agitation later in the evening. Some of the protesters set up camp in what was declared earlier as the agitation site in Goldface and stayed overnight. Volunteers were also seen providing food, beverages and other necessities to the protesters. Today, for a third consecutive day, people continue to gather in front of the Presidential Secretariat, calling for the incumbent president and the government to step down. Stalls with food, water, other beverages and necessities have also been set up along the Goldface Green stretch leading up to the Presidential Secretariat. Similar to the anti-government protests, some protests in support of the president and the current government are also seen. A few incidents of clashes between the two factions were reported today. One such incident was reported from the area of Halawat in Chilau, as a tense situation erupted after a protest march in support of the government had made their way to the town. Meanwhile, a rally in support of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa was organised in Anuradhapura by former Chief Minister of the Northern Central Province, S.M. Ranjit. As the group proceeded to the Sri Lanka Freedom Party office in Anuradhapura, a heated argument erupted between supporters of another group which held anti-government sentiment. In the meantime, Sri Lankans living overseas also staged anti-government protests in some of the key cities.
The Ceylon Petroleum Corporation states that so far 375 to 400 million US dollars have been spent under the Indian credit line through which Sri Lanka has been receiving fuel over the past month. In addition, the CPC chairman stated that orders have been placed to import 265,000 metric tons of diesel and 140,000 metric tons of fuel for the month of April. Meanwhile, the Public Utilities Commission said it expects to reduce power cuts from April 18th due to the availability of more fuel, sufficient stocks of coal and rising water levels to generate energy. Also, there won't be scheduled power cuts island-wide on April 13th, 14th and 15th in view of the Sinhala and Tamil New Year holidays as well as Good Friday.
Sri Lankans have been experiencing daily scheduled power interruptions for the past 3 months due to the diminishing levels of water in hydro-catchment areas and the lack of foreign reserves to clear shipments for fuel required to power thermal power plants. But yesterday, the Public Utilities Commission announced that water levels in reservoirs are on the rise due to the heavy showers across the country beginning Friday. The Ceylon Electricity Board expects hydropower generation to rise to 31% from the earlier capacity of 20% as water levels at hydropower reservoirs have risen from 18% to 30.5% by now.
ඊළඟ සතියේදී අපිට විශාල වශයෙන් වැසි ලැබීමට නියමිතයි. මේ මාසෙ ලැබෙන වර්ෂාව අනුව අපිට පුළුවන් මේ තත්ත්වය වර්ධනය කරගෙන අපිට ජල ධාරිතාවෙන් 50%කට වැඩි ප්‍රමාණයක් විදුලිය නිපදවන්න පුළුවන් නම් අපිට විදුලිය කැපීම අවම කරලා ඉදිරි ප්‍රභවයන් කළමනාකරණය කරගෙන අපිට ගොඩ එන්න පුළුවන්.
With this being the case, power will be interrupted for just 4 hours tomorrow anytime between 8:30 am and 10:45 pm. The PUCSL stated that there will be no power cuts from the 13th to the 15th of April. However, on the 16th and the 17th, 2 hours and 15 minutes of scheduled power cuts will be implemented.
අපි බලාපොරොත්තු තියෙන 18න් පස්සේ දීර්ඝකාලීන විදුලි කප්පාදුවට යන්නේ නැතුව මේ තත්ත්වය කළමනාකරණය කර ගැනීමට ලංකා කංච නීති සංස්ථාවෙන් ලැබෙන දීසල් ප්‍රමාණය ක්‍රමානුකූලව අවශ්‍ය ප්‍රමාණයට ලැබීමෙන් පවතිනවා. ගල්ලංගට අපිට ප්‍රශ්නයක් නැහැ. දැන්ට ඇති වෙන ප්‍රමාණයක් තියෙනවා. ඒ තව ෂිප්මන්ට් 5කට මුදල් ගෙවලා ඒක ලබා ගන්න අවශ්‍ය සහයෝගය මහා බැංකුවෙන් ලැබෙනවා ඇති.
In the meantime, the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation said that measures will be taken to prevent people from filling cans and barrels with fuel at refueling stations. This, they say, is done in order to prevent the rising demand for fuel, which according to the CPC was recorded at 7,500 metric tons over the past 2 months. They say that even though the average demand for fuel has been 5,500 metric tons in the past, it had risen by 2,000 metric tons in February and March due to panic buying.
අපි තීන්දුවක් ගත්තා 12 13 14 දිනයන්හි කියන්නේ හෙට අනිද්දා සහ ඊළඟ දවසේ ඉන්ධන කෑන් වලට ලබා දීම නතර කරන්න. කෙසේ වෙතත් කුෂිකාර්ම කටයුතු සඳහා ඉන්ධන අවශ්‍යතාවයක් තිබෙනවා නම් ප්‍රදේශයේ ඉන්න කුෂිකාර්ම පරිශ්‍රණ නිලධාරී මහත්මයා ග්‍රාම සේවා නිලධාරී මහත්මයා මගින් අපිට අනුමැතියක් සහිතව පැමිණියොත් අපි ලබා දීමට කටයුතු කරනවා. ඊට අමතරව නිෂ්පාදන සේවා කර්මාන්ත සඳහා ඉන්ධන අවශ්‍යතාවයක් තිබෙනවා නම් ප්‍රදේශයේ ප්‍රාදේශීය ලේකම්තුමාගේ අනුමැතියක් ලබාගෙන ඉන්න ඕන. භූමි තෙල් වෙනදා වගේ
The CPC chairman went on to say that measures have been taken to import 265,000 metric tons of diesel and 140,000 metric tons of petrol for April. He added that 375 to 400 million US dollars of the 500 million US dollar Indian credit line for fuel has been utilized so far.
Well, Sri Lanka's Hiran Abesekara wins Best Actor at Olivier Awards in London. Visuals coming up after this break.
Big 3.
Welcome back to the news. The Ministry of Defence today refuted claims made in Parliament that avant-garde chairman Nisanka Senadipati attended a National Security Council meeting during the day of the anti-government protests in Mirihana. Issuing a communique today, Defence Secretary General Kamal Gunaratne said, contrary to media reports, no such meeting had taken place and that there are no instances of unauthorised persons attending the National Security Council meetings.
In Parliament last week, Parliamentarian of Jatika Jana Balawegaya Vijitha Herath stated that Chairman of Avant-Garde Maritime Services Nisanka Senadipati had allegedly attended a National Security Council meeting convened during the night of the protests in Mirihana. The protest was carried out on the 31st of March in front of the residence of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa in Mirihana. According to MP Vijitha Herath, Senadipati had stated that he had sent 200 of his men to the protest's location. However, the Defence Ministry in its statement today refuted the claim as baseless, adding that no such meeting took place. Defence Secretary General Kamal Gunratna stressed that there are no instances where unauthorised persons attend the National Security Council meetings. President as the Minister of Defence, Prime Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister of Public Security, State Minister of Defence, Secretary to the President, Defence Secretary, Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Secretary to Ministry of Public Security, Treasury Secretary, Chief of Defence Staff, Triforce Commanders and IGP are statutory members attending the NSC meetings. The appointed members of the NSC are Chief of National Intelligence and Director General of State Intelligence Service, Director General of Military Intelligence, Deputy Inspector General of the CID, Director of Counter-Terrorist Investigation Division and the STF Commandant. The Defence Ministry statement added that the meeting is hosted by the Presidential Secretariat as it is the principal organ of the President to make decisions on all national security aspects of the country, adding that no unauthorised persons were invited or allowed to attend the NSC meetings following the election of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa as President.
Now, the Department of Meteorology expects prevailing heavy showers as a result of the inter-monsoon rains to continue until the 14th of April. Due to the heavy rainfall, the National Building Research Organisation extended its early landslide warnings to 8 districts until 1 p.m. tomorrow.
During the past 24 hours up to 8:30 am today, Chillau recorded the highest rainfall of 144 millimeters. 102 millimeters of rainfall was experienced in Colombo, while it was 94 millimeters in Ratmalana. As per the weather forecast issued by the Meteorology Department for tomorrow, heavy showers above 100 millimeters can be expected at several areas in the eastern, over, central and north central provinces. Fairly heavy showers above 75 millimeters can be expected in some areas of the northwestern, western and Savaragamu provinces as well as in Galle and Matra districts.
Prevailing weather situation, we are expecting actually next 3-4 days until 14th April. So, due to the low-level atmospheric disturbances in the vicinity of Sri Lanka, can expect showery conditions actually most part of the island.
Taking the heavy rains into account, the National Building Research Organisation, which issued early landslide warnings to Badulla, Colombo, Kalutara, Kandy, Kegalle, Kurunegala, Matale and Nuwara districts, has extended it until 1 p.m. tomorrow.
At the weekly Treasury bill auction today, government Treasury bill yields surged to a multi-year high. The surges follow central banks doubling its key policy rates on Friday, raising each by an unprecedented 700 basis points to tame inflation. Only 93.7% of the total offered amount of 87.5 billion rupees was accepted at the auction. T-bill yields recorded a back-to-back rise while topping the previous week's high, with yields of 3 months, 6 months and 1 year raising to 19.7%, 22.75% and 23.36% respectively. Now, Asian shares slipped today ahead of a week throbbing with central bank meetings and US inflation data, while the euro eked out a gain on relief. The far right did not win the first round of the French presidential elections. The mood in equity markets was cautious, with the MSCI's broadest index of Asia-Pacific shares outside Japan easing 0.1%. Japan's Nikkei 225 dropped 0.6%, having shed 2.6% last week. South Korea's Kospi index dropped 0.3%, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng fell 2%. In the meantime, Shanghai Composite Index fell 1.1%. Meanwhile, oil prices dropped by $4 a barrel today, with Brent crude tumbling below $100 on plans to release record volumes of crude and oil products from strategic stocks and on continuing coronavirus lockdowns in China. International benchmark Brent crude declined 3.9% or $4.02 to trade at $98.72 a barrel. West Texas Intermediate crude futures, the U.S. oil benchmark, shed $3.95 to trade at $94.33 per barrel. Now, Ukraine's economy is set to shrink by almost half this year as a result of the war. The World Bank forecasts Russia's invasion will cause more economic damage across Eastern Europe and parts of Asia than the coronavirus pandemic, as the conflict shuts half of the country's businesses and slashed exports. The World Bank is of the view that Ukraine needed massive financial support immediately. The closure of Black Sea shipping from Ukraine had cut off some 90% of the country's grain exports and half of its total exports. Now, the Russian ruble weakened sharply in jittery trade today, reversing some of the previous week's gains after the central bank decided to relax temporary capital control measures aimed at limiting a drop in the currency. Late on Friday, the Russian central bank said it will scrap a 12% commission for buying foreign currency through brokerages from April 11th and lift a temporary ban on selling foreign exchange cash to individuals starting April 18th. Now, the ruble fell to 82.09 against the dollar at the market opening in Moscow from 71 rubles hit on Friday for its strongest since November 11th. The ruble retains support from the obligatory conversion of 80% of FX revenues by export-focused companies, as well as from high interest rates, even though the central bank unexpectedly cut its key rates from 20% to 17% last week. Capital analysts said Russia receives about $1.4 billion a day in export revenues, and the ruble could firm further given Russia's capital controls and shrinking imports. Pakistan's parliament has selected Shehbaz Sharif as the country's new prime minister after Imran Khan was ousted in a no-confidence vote in the early hours of yesterday. The opposition coalition leader, who had worked to depose Imran Khan, won the support of a majority in parliament. Shehbaz Sharif will now form a new government that can remain in power until elections are due in August 2023. Cricketer turned politician Imran Khan was ousted in a no-confidence vote after days of high political drama. He had attempted to block a previous attempt to bring a no-confidence motion against him by dissolving parliament and calling for a snap election. However, the country's Supreme Court upheld an opposition petition that his actions were unconstitutional and ordered the no-confidence vote to go ahead. In the meantime, thousands of supporters of former Prime Minister Imran Khan poured onto the streets of Pakistani cities yesterday, a day after the incumbent leader lost a no-confidence vote in parliament. The crowds held placards and waved flags of Khan's political party as they chanted slogans. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said today that thousands of Russian troops were massing for a new offensive in the east, and Russia said it would not lift its military operation in Ukraine for any further peace talks. British intelligence said Ukrainian forces had already repulsed several Russian assaults in eastern regions. Russian forces were also pushing to establish control over the southern port city of Mariupol, the linchpin between Russian-held areas to the west and east, and already devastated by weeks of siege and bombardment. There are tens of thousands of dead, but despite this, the Russians are not stopping their offensive. Zelensky is reported to have told South Korea's parliament by video link. Ukrainian President Zelensky also appealed to Seoul to provide his country with military aid to bolster its fight against the Russian onslaught. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said the Kremlin would not halt its operation for any new round of peace talks, accusing Kiev of failing to reciprocate in previous sessions. Once again, congratulations to Hirana Besekara. And that's it from us here tonight. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.